Gap wedge, lob wedge, pitching wedge, 58 degree, 52 degree, 10 degrees of bounce, 8 degrees of bounce. Man, oh man, wedges can be confusing. Well, if you're confused, you came to the right spot, because today I'm going to help you understand the differences in wedges and when you should be using them on the golf course. I'm PGA teaching professional Todd Kolb, Director of Instruction for US Golf TV and the Sanford Power Golf Academy. And there's no question about it, wedges can be very confusing for a lot of golfers. And we're going to dispel some of that confusion today. We're going to get some answers for you. So first of all, if you haven't already, hey, be sure to click that subscribe button. And also be sure to leave a comment or a question. I do my best to answer all the questions, and we love hearing from you. And we're producing great content each and every week that's helping golfers all over the globe. So let's dive right into this. What I want to do is I want to attack this. First of all, let's talk about the different types of wedges. All right, and then we're going to talk about when we use them. So first of all, the wedges are the clubs that have the most loft on them. Now typically we've got a pitching wedge, you've got a gap wedge, and what we might categorize as a sand wedge or a lob wedge. Kind of depends upon the term that you're using, but those are kind of the three areas that we break them down. Now what's the biggest difference in the different categories? Well, first of all, the pitching wedge has the least amount of loft on it relative to the gap wedge and the sand wedge or lob wedge. All right? Now, how much loft does a pitching wedge have on it? It depends upon the manufacturer. I like to play Titleist clubs, and so the loft on a pitching wedge, I mean, it can vary quite a bit. 44 degrees, 48 degrees, you name it. There's a wide variety of them in there, but understand that the pitching wedge, out of the wedges, has the least amount of loft. Now, it also is the longest of the three, meaning in terms of length generally. All right, so it has the least amount of loft, although it's quite a bit more loft because it's more loft than your regular irons, but it has the least amount of loft and also is the longest. We're going to talk about in a little bit here about why that's important. The next one is kind of what people call like a gap wedge. Now, a gap wedge kind of fills the gap generally between the pitching wedge and the lob wedge or the sand wedge. So generally those are going to be 52 degrees, maybe 54 degrees, somewhere kind of in that. They're kind of filling that gap a little bit. Now, of course, those are going to be a little bit shorter than the pitching wedge also, and they're going to also have a thing on it that's called bounce. Now, before we get too far into this, I want to talk about what bounce is, because this is important. Now, if you haven't already, you got to check out some of our other videos on chipping. I mean, man, oh man, we have done a ton of videos on chipping. Matter of fact, one of our videos, well over 1.5 million views. I mean, and so chipping and wedge is an area that we've really helped a lot of people out. And I think we've even done one specifically on bounce. But what is bounce? Well, bounce is the amount of curve that's on the bottom of a golf club. So on the bottom of a club, really almost every club has some curve on the bottom. So I've got the lob wedge here, which we're going to talk about in just a second. That's got some curve on the bottom. So when we look at it, the leading edge is up and off the ground. So that's what we call bounce. The more curve there is in the bottom, the higher the bounce. So bounces can range all over the map, 8 degrees, 10 degrees, 12 degrees, somewhere kind of in that range is where it's at. Now, what do we need to know about that? Well, bounce makes the shot easier. And there's a lot of things in terms of chipping where people don't use a bounce correctly that really make it difficult. But bounce makes the shot easier because it allows the club to bounce through the turf. That's how I like to tell people. You want the club, a wedge, especially when you're hitting it, to kind of bounce through the turf, especially around the greens when you're doing chipping and those types of things. So the gap wedge, once again to review here, more loft than the pitching wedge, typically 52 degrees, 54 degrees, somewhere in that range, and is also going to have some bounce on it, okay? The more bounce it has, the more the club's going to bounce. The less it has, the more it's going to dig. So that's a gap wedge. Now, also, I'm going to strongly encourage you to check out a place called GreatGolfTipsNow.com. GreatGolfTipsNow.com. That's another area where these are really in-depth videos we have there that dive deep into not only wedges and chipping, but the full swing. It's all free. It's something I put together for my fellow golfers. Hugely popular. Be sure to check that out. Now let's talk about the third one here, and that's what I like to call the lob wedge. Some people call it sand wedge, lob wedge. It's kind of the same thing. So this is your club that you have that typically has the most loft on it. Now my lob wedge has 58 degrees. Some of them will be upwards of 60 degrees. I've seen them at 56. But once again, understand that out of your wedges, it's the one that has the most loft on it. So also has bounce on it. All right, so my lob wedge here has the most loft and the most bounce. Is also the shortest club in my bag. All right, so those are the three types of general different wedges. You've got pitching wedge, you've got gap wedge kind of in between, and then you've got your lob wedge, all right? Now, hopefully that makes sense. If it doesn't, leave a question in the comments there below and I'll answer that for you as best as I can. Or maybe you've got some ideas on it that maybe I haven't covered. Be sure to put those in there and help out our fellow golfers. And always be sure to subscribe. So let's talk about when we use the different types of clubs. Now, I'm not going to dive real deep into the technique because, as I already said a couple times, we've got a ton of great content on the technique of chipping and hitting wedge shots. You should be checking that out. But when would I use my pitching wedge? Well, of course, the pitching wedge first of all, you're going to hit full shots with it. So like for me, I'll use my pitching wedge when I want to hit a shot 110, 115, maybe 120 yards. All right, on a regular full swing. But around the green, I'll also use it for chipping when I want to hit the ball low and have it roll out. We call that like a bump and run. All right, so when I want to have the ball come out kind of low trajectory and I want to have it run quite a bit, call that a bump and run. I use my pitching wedge for that. Okay, so that's kind of when I'd use that club. Now let's talk a little bit about the gap wedge. Now once again, the gap wedge, mine's got 52 degrees of loft on it. I love this club for those pitch shots. 60, 70 yards, kind of those mid-wedge shots, kind of not a full swing, but not a chip shot, you know, kind of right in that area in terms of yardage. I love that club for this. That's when I'll hit those types of shots. I'll maybe choke down on it a little bit, all right, and hit those shots in there. And around the green for chipping, though, I'll also use it when I'm kind of looking for that mid-shot. Maybe I want the ball to fly and roll relatively the same distance. That's when I'm going to use this club a lot. I do a ton of chipping, and I recommend a lot of our students do a ton of chipping with their gap wedge. It's very versatile. You can use it in a lot of situations. Now the last one we got here is, of course, the lob wedge, the sand wedge. Okay, we talked about that already. It's got the most loft. Mine has got 58. A lot, especially young people, they love the lob wedge. I mean, they use that thing. They love hitting that big high flop shot, right? So those are the situations where you're going to use this club. When you want to hit the ball really high and soft. All right. Now, I do not recommend, this is my personal preference as a coach. All right. I am not a big fan of hitting the lob wedge in a full swing motion. So I would not try to hit my 58 degree in a normal big full swing, because I think what happens is the ball starts to just shoot straight up in the air. It's got too much spin on it. People overswing. It's not a good situation. I like to use my gap wedges, I already mentioned earlier, for that. So I wouldn't recommend you use this club for a big full swing. But around the green, it can be really useful. So where would I use that? Bunkers for sure. All right, bunkers for sure. We talked about bounce. If you're not a good bunker player, you got to check out our videos on bunker play and understand how to use bounce, because I'm telling you, it'll drastically improve your bunker play just like that overnight. So I'd use it in the bunker. I'm going to use it when I want to hit the ball high and soft, just out of a regular lie. But I'm also going to use it when the ball's in that deep, thick grass. When it's really buried and down there, I'm also going to use a club that has the most loft on it. So those are a couple of the different wedges that I like to use in terms of that. So, hey, hopefully that helps clarify some different things on the wedges. The last thing I want to tell you is that when you go to the golf course and you're going to implement some of these things with your wedges, understand when they're supposed to be used and where you're supposed to use them. And that basic understanding can help you hit better golf shots on the golf course and certainly help you enjoy the game a little bit more.